Hey guys, welcome back to another video with the BIM Mentor, and today we are going to be picking up where we left off in the last video. So we were looking at how to remove import lines in the last video. But one thing that also tends to happen when you bring in CAD imports is that you end up with some of these weird categories with the A dash as well. And these are line styles and not line patterns. So what we'll be doing today is we'll duplicate the code from last week and just make a new add-in that will address the actual line styles. So I've gone ahead to do a few things just to save time in today's video. The first thing I did is I duplicated last video's class, which was delete import line pattern, and I made a new class and I called it delete import line style. If this is a bit confusing, I'd recommend naming it in a way that's clearer for you. I've also gone right ahead into my add-in manifest and I've included the delete import line style into my add-in manifest, so it's there now. This saves us time with using the add-in manager down the line because when we say build, everything is set up and good to go. All right, back in our code, I've already gone ahead to implement our iExternal command interface with the UI doc and the doc. If you're completely new to this, I recommend starting with my very beginner video because I've explained this a couple of times. We have to first define a string, which is the prefix we want to search for. Our prefix in this case is going to be import. So I'm just going to type that in quotation marks. Now we could make this to no longer be case sensitive. Like we could just type import in small caps, all caps. There are ways to make code to search for things that are not case sensitive. I think we need to take this step by step so that the video isn't like 2 hours long. So I'm just going to leave it as a capital letter import. But if you don't want to, if you have a situation where your import lines are coming across in like different caps, there are ways around that. Thankfully, all our line patterns have a capital import, so we will just be working with that. All right, the other thing I've gone ahead to do is to wrap a transaction in a try-catch statement. I know we didn't do this in the last video, but it's just always safer when you're doing something that you have to actually create a transaction for in Revit to actually wrap it up in a try catch statement, because this way you're able to make sure that if the code doesn't work for whatever reason, you're not left with Revit just running till infinity. It actually just closes out and returns that, your code failed. So it's always a safe bet. Regardless, if you want to go with the approach we used in the last video, your code will work just as fine. We already have a new transaction. We've called it delete line styles and we've started the transaction. We've committed the transaction and we've put a return. So all that's left is for us to fill in this part where we are actually getting the lines category, which would then contain the subcategory of line style, and also get all the subcategories of line style that have that prefix import. So this is a portion of the code we're going to be fixing up today to actually get this to work. Take a moment, take a screenshot, do whatever you have to do so that you can get exactly what I have on the screen in your Visual Studio. I know a couple of people have asked me for GitHub. I'm still on the fence regarding how much of my code I want to put out there. Just I'm not quite sure of the risks and impacts depending on your organization or your intended use. And so please bear with me if I don't put my code on GitHub. I'm still figuring this out. Anyway, back to the coding. So first thing we want to do is create a category of lines. So for the last code, we were able to just access a property that was the line pattern. But in this case, we need to actually access the actual lines category. The line style is a subcategory of the lines category. So we'll go with category. As always, with C#, you declare before you start your variable. Lines category. And then you want to access the settings inside the active document. So doc.settings, And then we want to go into the categories inside the doc. Oh, I'm just going to select that cat fries is not what I want. And get underscore item. And then in here, we will access the built-in category that is OST lines. OST underscore lines. Perfecto. So I'll just close that up with my tab. So now we're collecting all the lines in the active document. We want to create an if statement that will make sure that this code runs even if there is no line category. If the line category is empty, so equal null. If there's no line category, then what we want is show a task dialog that will say line category not found. It is very rare that this would happen on a project that has been active, but you never know. And one thing about coding is you never want to find out by crashing your system. So it's always good to put these safe bets in your code just to avoid any issues. Cool. And end with a semicolon, return result.failed, because in this case it would mean that your code failed. And end with a semicolon as well. So this is just a safe bet. Next thing is to actually create an empty list like we did before that will put all the line styles to delete in here, and then when you run the transaction it will simply delete these lines. So we did this in the last video with the line patterns. We made an empty list and we've done it exactly the same here. Instead of line pattern, it's line styles. And now we will go ahead to do a for each loop that will run through this category and return all the line styles with line patterns that start with import. It's a bit of an inception, but just to explain again, we're going to be looping through all of the line style categories that have an associated line pattern that starts with import. Got it? Cool. Next up, we will create a for each loop. So for each, and inside our for each loop, we'll be looping through category, and we'll call it subcategory because now we're going into a subcategory for the lines. In lines category, so all of the lines dot subcategories. So we're accessing all the subcategories in the lines, and we'll say if the subcategory is not empty. So if there's actually a subcategory, I'm just going to tab to implement that. So if there's subcategories in our lines and it's not empty, then retrieve the element ID for the line pattern. So we're going to create a new variable for the pattern ID. It's an element ID variable. This will be equal to the subcategory dot get line pattern ID. So this is the method that will return that ID, and it requires a graphic style type. So in this case, it's going to be graphic style type dot projection. The graphic style type only has two methods. It's either a cut or a projection. Back in Revit, you can actually see projection under line weight. I don't think this is what it's referring to. However, I can't be too sure. I'm also growing in my coding journey as well. But back here in the Revit API, if you look at the graphic styles type enumeration, it is an enumeration. You only have two members, and that is projection and cut. And the description is projection and cut. I guess it could be the same as the Revit one. I'll figure it out, let you know. And if you figure it out before me, please let me know. Back in Visual Studio, we want to actually get the projection method, or in this case, member. And semicolon. And then we want to create an element variable that will be the actual line pattern element. So we first got the ID, now we're getting the actual element. And then we will access the document and say get element by pattern ID. So I'm just going to tap because this is exactly what we want it to do. So we're saying get the element based on this pattern ID. Now we'll create another if statement that will say if the line pattern element is not empty and if the line pattern element's name, so remember this is now an element, no longer the ID. If the element's name starts with a prefix of import, then add it to the list. Or in this specific case, add the ID of that subcategory to the list. To clarify once again, we're getting line styles as a subcategory of lines, hence this, and we are getting the ID of that subcategory to delete, because that's how you can actually delete things in the C# Revit APIs, by the ID. The name behaves kind of like a string, so you can't just say delete by name. It doesn't really work that way. You have to always, in most cases, get the ID of the element that you want to get rid of. So if line pattern element, I'm just going to select that, is not equal to null, tap to accept, but that's not all I want. I also want an and, so and the ampersand twice is a way to include other things. And if the name is equal to prefix, oh, that's a good one, but I don't want it to be equal to, because that is sort of saying if the whole name of the line pattern is import, which means if this whole thing is import, then return the ID. That's not what we want. We want to check if it actually starts with import, not if it's just import. So we'll go back and we'll say, instead of equals equals, we'll say if the name dot start with, or starts with in this case, prefix, then what we want to do is add the ID to this empty list that we have here. So the list is line styles to delete. I'll select it from here. Dot add subcategory dot ID. Okay, and then we want to clean up our syntax. We have an if statement here. We have another if statement here. One of them is missing a closing bracket. It's this one. So I'll just close that off and it should be fine now. We have one excess. We have one less closing bracket for the for each statement. So I'll add another curly bracket again and we're good. We no longer have red lines. We'll look at the errors at the end. Sometimes our code fixes itself since we're still in the process. The only thing that's left to do now is to return a dialog to tell us if this was actually completed. To do this, we'll just create a simple task dialog and say task dialog.show success. Should be like the name of the task dialog to show that it succeeded, and line styles to delete. Yeah, that's the correct spelling. Dot count plus line styles were deleted. I'm just going to add a space to this so it reads well. And I will put a semicolon here. It says a bracket is expected here, which is correct because that prefix is its own separate bracket. So I fixed that. Now we have 0 errors, which is good. So this should work. The only thing is sometimes when you've run your code and you've deleted your line styles, you want to run it again because you're not too sure if you got everything the first time. And it's good to actually return a message if there's nothing to delete, like if none of your line patterns start with import, right? So instead of just one task dialog, I'd say we should wrap it up in an if-else statement, so that if there is something to delete, it shows this. If there's nothing to delete, then it shows there's nothing to delete, right? So let's just do that. Let's move this a step further. So if the count, which is like the number of IDs that were added to that empty list, if it's greater than 0, then run this transaction, which is doc.delete line styles to delete. We skipped that before, my bad, but basically this is the transaction that will actually delete them. Line styles to delete, and we'll put this task dialog just in there because if that is successful, that is exactly what we want to happen. So delete them, show us this dialog. Else, if there is nothing to delete, then show us a task dialog that says, so I'm just going to pick from here, task dialog dot show, and I'm going to call this one just information because it's not successful. The last one we called success, this one we're calling information, and return a message that says no line styles were found, and end with a full stop and a semicolon. And I think that's it. I think we're good to go. So I'm just going to look through. We don't have any errors, which is good. We always have these mismatch warnings, which is to be expected. We have some recommendations here. For each statement converts the database element to a line pattern element, adding an explicit cast to make it intent clear as it may fail at runtime. This is true, however, we're going to ignore this for now. This is just a good way for us to optimize our code. As we get more experienced, we will be doing such things. For now, we will be happy to see that our script works and our task is completed. All right, so I'm just going to build solution. So I'm just going to jump back into Revit here. And like I mentioned at the beginning, it's good to just do some QA work here. Make sure that all the lines you want gone are set to import. And I'm going to do that and come back. And then we'll run the script just to see that they're all gone. I've gone ahead to clean up the line patterns, and I've changed the line patterns for all of the styles I want gone to start with import. And you could do this just by typing import, and it will take you straight to the list of your import lines. Again, it's recommended to run this script before purging your model of import lines if you're going to take this method. Otherwise, you won't have anything that's the common theme between all your line styles. If you have done that, then maybe you need to write a script that will search through your line styles for a specific name, maybe starting with a-detail or something. There are many ways to go about this. For this video, I've just gone ahead to make sure that the line patterns all start with import, and I'll just say okay. I will go into my add-in manager, click on add-in manager, and it's always good to reload your DLL just in case. Sometimes there's a lag between the code you have here and what you've actually built in your DLL. So I'd always recommend loading it from scratch after a couple of tries. This is the code we want. I'll click on it and I'll say run. 21 line styles were deleted, which is good. And just for the sake of trying it out, I'll run it again just to see that nothing will happen this time. It's saying no line styles were found. This is because we hard coded an alternative result. If we hadn't done this, we'd have been given some kind of error screen, which is not really nice when you're designing a tool for people to use. So that's why it's always good to create some if statements for different scenarios. And if I go back into my line styles, I only have the default Revit ones, so it worked. What I think will be worth investigating in the future is some kind of user interface where I can just say which keyword I want so that I can maybe run through different keywords instead of just import. So I think it's time we started learning about making user interfaces, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much.